Okay, let's start. All right, so today's revision session, the focus is the 15-mark question. So we've done paper 1, we've got paper 2 on Thursday. Paper 2 consists of 4 chapters: algorithm design and problem solving, programming, databases, Boolean logic. At the end of paper 2, there is a scenario-based question. So you get a long extended scenario and you have to write some pseudocode or program code to respond to that question. The 15-mark question is based on chapters 7 and 8 and predominantly 8 programming. Okay, so this is where you get a long question and then you have to write some pseudocode. So I'm going to show you in today's revision session the structure on how to answer that question and the best way to kind of maximize your marks. Okay, this question, the paper is 1 hour and 45 minutes. They suggest in the specification that you spend 30 minutes on this question. So 30 minutes. So you want to spend 1 hour and 15 minutes on the rest of the paper, and then you want to spend 30 minutes on the scenario-based question, ideally. Okay. Yeah, so let's have a look and see what that looks like. If we were to think about like marks, this paper is worth 75 marks. The scenario-based question is 15 marks. That makes up 20% of this exam and 10% of the overall qualification. So it's significant for a lot of us. If we're able to get as many marks as we can in this question, that could be the difference between, let's say, a grade 8 and a grade 9, a grade 7 and an 8, a grade 6 and a 7, and so on. So it's quite an important question. So plan for today, we do the 15 marker. And then at the end, we'll have a little Q&A if any questions. All right, so let's have a look. So the question, we're gonna do the question together, and I'm gonna show you a method now. So we'll do it together. So at the end of the paper 2, you're gonna see a scenario-based question. It's a long scenario. What I would suggest is you read the scenario twice before you even attempt it. Underline any variables that you can identify, any constants, any arrays, any inputs, and kind of annotate around it. If I were you, this will help you when you write the pseudocode, because just like in English, if you're writing a long essay, if you don't plan, then it's going to be difficult, because you might forget to add some key parts. All right, so it's good to underline, highlight keywords, annotate around the question, so that when you come to write the question, it makes it easier for you to write the pseudocode and remember all the parts that you need to add. Okay. Overall, tackling this problem, we can split it up into 4 sections. So variable, constants, and arrays, which is the declaration and initialization. Then your inputs, then the processes, and then the outputs. So first of all, you read the scenario, then you identify what variables are there, what constants are there, what arrays are there, and what values do I need to initialize. And I'm going to show you what I mean by initialize in a minute. Okay. And then what inputs does the user have to enter in this program? Okay. What the processes, this involves what constructs am I going to use? In terms of selection, is this going to be an if statement or a case statement? In terms of iteration, is this going to be a for or repeat or a while? Am I going to be counting anything? Am I going to be doing a totaling of anything? And you need to think about that. And I would write that, annotate that next or around the question. And then at the end of the program, what normally happens is there's some sort of output. So you enter something, the user enters something, your pseudocode or program code carries out a calculation, and then at the end there's some output to say X, Y, or Z. And we're going to look at the specimen question. The only issue is this is the first year that the scenario-based question is in the exam, because last year and the previous years there was a pre-release. So this is something kind of new to everyone. So you're all in the same position, which is good. So, and one last thing, this question you can pick either, you can write your response in either pseudocode or program code. By now, if you've done your prep, you should have made that decision. Am I going to write my response in pseudocode, or am I going to write my response in program code? It doesn't matter which one. It just comes down to whichever you personally prefer, okay? All right. And in fact, when we look at the way that they mark this question, which we're going to do next, the actual syntax is not important. It's the logic that they're looking for. So even in program code, if you forget little things like a parenthesis, a bracket, a comma, some quotation marks, that doesn't really matter. Is the logic of your program correct is more important. They're not really too concerned about the syntax. And especially with pseudocode, there is no set syntax, okay? All right, so let's look at the mark scheme. Before we attempt the question, let's look at what the mark scheme looks like. In this specification is AO1, AO1, AO2, and AO3. The 15-mark question looks specifically at AO2 and AO3, which is applying your knowledge and understanding of the principles of computer science to a given context, the given context being the scenario. And then AO3 is writing or providing a solution to the problem. So that's what it is. Let's see what it looks like. So what happens is for AO2, there's like bands. So you can fall in what they'll do is when they're marking your response, they'll decide, does the student fall in band 1 to 3 marks, 4 to 6, 7 to 9? And then within that band, are they a 9? Are they a 8? Are they a 7, for example? So this is for AO2, and this is for AO3. This is how they mark the 15-mark question. This looks like what I've done on the next slide, I'll show you, is I've just summarized the mark scheme, because there's quite a lot here, but this is more for the language of a teacher. So let's look at what this means for you guys, how you can get in AO2, 7 to 9 marks, and in AO3, 5 to 6. Because 9 marks and 9 plus 6 is 15, which is the maximum you can get for this scenario-based question. So let me just summarize what this means. All right. So in order to get the top marks in this question, you need to use a range of programming techniques that is appropriate to the scenario. So what does a technique mean, first of all? The technique means the selection. So if or case, you use one or the other. The iteration, have they used a for loop? Have they used a while loop? Have they used a repeat? It depends on the question. So you don't just use any technique. It has to be appropriate to the scenario. So for example, if you know the number of iterations that need to be carried out is a fixed amount, then you use a count controlled or a for loop, also known as a for loop. You would lose marks if you use, say, a repeat or a while loop, because it's not appropriate to the solution. So as you're writing the solution, you just need to decide which construct or technique do I use, okay? Then it says, data structures used are appropriate and store all the data. This just means you've identified mainly all or most of the variables, the constants, and the arrays that the program requires. And you've declared them and you've initialized them. And that will allow you to get the top marks. Then the next section, AO3, it says the program has been fully commented, right? We're gonna do this together in a minute. You write the scenario-based question, and then when you finish, you go back and you add comments. So comments is you're just explaining your code. That will benefit you because when the examiner's marking it, even if your syntax is not correct and your logic's not entirely correct, if you write a good comment, then he'll explain it to the examiner, and it means it's more likely that you'll get the marks, okay? Meaningful identifier names used. So what this means is, when you're writing your pseudocode or your program code and you have a variable, a constant, or an array, if you use some identifier like X, Y, Z, or something that doesn't make sense, then if we go back, you're going to be looking at the lower end marks. So look, majority of identifiers or some identifiers used are appropriate. But what we want is we want to be in the top band, suitable identifiers with names meaningful to their purpose. So that means when you're deciding on a name, it has to make sense. So for example, if it was the number of students in a class, you might call the variable number of students instead of X or Y, okay? The program is in logical order. And if I go back to this, what that means is you've got your declarations, initialization, input, process, and output. If the input comes after the process, then that means the program is not in logical order, which means you won't be able to access the higher marks in the mark scheme. So it has to be in the correct order. So if you use this format, declare, then your inputs, then your process, then your outputs, then you're more likely to approach that question in the logical order. And then the final one is your solution, the pseudocode or the program code that you write. It meets all of the requirements given in the question. So the question will look something like this, okay? And then it'll say write a program that meets the following requirements. In order to get the top marks, it should meet all of the bullet points, okay? All right. Having a look at that, sorry. I'm just going to give you just a minute because I've spoken a lot. Just a minute just to like reflect on that and if that made sense. If that made sense in terms of the mark scheme. So let's have a look. Let's summarize the tips in the chat then. All right. So use a range of programming techniques in your response. When I say programming techniques, what do I mean by that? What is a programming technique? What does that mean? Anyone? Yeah, go on, Mo.
Well, so is that like the different concepts that we've learnt, like selection, counting, stuff like that?
Correct. So using the techniques is selection. So am I going to use if or case? Iteration, which is a loop, okay? Iteration. Am I going to use a for loop, which is count control? Am I going to use repeat, which is post condition? Or am I going to use while, which is precondition? Is there any counting or totaling? Okay. These are what they mean by techniques. So using techniques, a range of techniques will get you on the higher end of marks. So using some if statement, using a loop, using some counting, that will get you on the higher end of marks. Using the appropriate ones, i.e. use the correct ones, the correct loop, for example, that will give you access to the highest marks, right? So that's the first part. Use a range of programming techniques in your response. Another tip is use meaningful identifier names. What does that mean? Use meaningful identifier names. Anyone? Using meaningful identifier names. What does that mean? Using meaningful identifiers. Is X a meaningful identifier name? Y? Yeah, excellent, Mo. Using names that relate to the question and that are not random. Exactly. So, student name instead of something like SN. SN could mean an abbreviation for one of many things, but student name is clear. Or if we said, for example, total marks, that's specific instead of something like just total. The total is not clear. Total could mean a total of anything. But total marks is clear and it's meaningful. Okay. Another tip, meet the requirements of the task. Where can we find the requirements of the task? Where is that? In this question that you can see displayed. Where is that? Yes, excellent. The bullet points. So when you've written the response and as you're writing the response, you want to refer to these bullet points. Thank you, Kumar. You want to make sure that you meet those bullet points, and that will allow you to access the higher end marks. Okay. And then the final point is ensure program is in logical order. So let's have a look at what I mean by logical order. All right. So if we were to say, if we were to split the program into the following four, so input, output, process, and declaration, we'll call it, what would be the correct logical order for this for a program? Those those four stages, what would be? You can just write the response in the chat. So input, output, process, and declaration. What order should that go in? Declaration first, good, excellent. Then, so yeah, declaration, then input, then process, then output. Excellent. You can't have an output if you haven't carried out the process. Okay, so if you do it in that order, declaration, input, process, and output, then that means your program will be in the logical order, which means you're more likely to get the top end of marks up to 15. Okay, excellent. So that's 4 tips. Let me just summarize the 4 tips. So number 1, use a range of programming techniques. Number 2, use meaningful identifier names. Okay? And then number 3, ensure program is in the logical order. Okay, so there are 3 tips for this 15-mark response. What we're going to do now is we're going to write together. We're going to look at the specimen 15-mark question, and we're going to answer it together using this method: declaration, input, process, and output. And then I'm going to type, and then you guys you'll be able to see the question. So I'm just going to give you, you've probably seen this, probably attempted, I know some of you have already done this and attempted it, but it'll be good practice just to do it together. Have a look on my screen. I'm just going to display it. And I just want you to read this, okay? Just give you 2 minutes just to read that. This is the specimen question, which is the only one that we have for this specification. There's another specimen, which is very similar to this, but it's from the 0478 spec, not the 0984 spec. Sorry, I'm just gonna. Okay, hopefully you've seen this question before, you've had a chance to read it. So how would we approach this question? So we read the scenario twice, we highlight, underline any key parts. So we can see they're using some arrays, and there's going to be a 1D and a 2D array. There's some variables that we need to declare. We need to calculate based on the average mark what grade they got, and then output some information about the name, combined total mark, average mark, grade awarded. So if we have a look at, if I just come back to here, let's visualize what this question entails. So the question, it says to us, there is a 1D array called student name, which contains the name of students in this class. So you should be able to just confirm, guys, you can see my screen. Can you see like these tables?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So this is just to visualize it. So the 1D array contains student names. We've got Mohammed, Ali, Judy, Maya, Uzair, and Zayed. Okay, and then the number is just saying the position or the location. So Mohammed is 1, Ali is 2, and so on. So that's the 1D array called student names. Then it says we have a 2D array. So the 2D array is different to a 1D array. 1D array is just one row, where a 2D array is like a table. It's made up of 2 rows of data. Okay. So this is the one that's called student mark, which contains the mark for each subject. This is subject 1, this is subject 2. So Mohammed, if we look at it, it says the position of each student's data in the 2 arrays is the same. So position 1 relates to position 1 here. Position 2 relates to position 2. So according to this, in the 1D array, Mohammed, in the 2 subjects, he got 56 and 77. Ali, he got 84 and 34. Judy, she got 55 and 66. So the positions relate to each other. The only difference is the array with the names of the students is a 1D array. The array with the marks is a 2D array. Okay. Then there's a variable size. There's a variable called class size. In this case, the class size is 6 students. Okay. And then there's a variable called subject number, which contains the number of subjects studied. There are 2 subjects. So the 156 relates to subject 1, 77 relates to subject 2. And then what happens is, in this task, we have to work out the total. So the total for Mohammed is 56 plus 77, which means he's got 133 total mark. And then we work out the average. The average is the total divided by the number of subjects. So there's 2 subjects rounded up, which gives us 67. And then if we go back to this response, based on the average mark, then there's a particular grade awarded. So if we were to work this out, what grade, if I go back to this, so Mohammed's average grade is 67, then what grade would Mohammed be awarded according to this? Anyone? I don't know if someone wrote something in the comment. Merit, yeah, thank you, Kamal. A merit. All right, excellent. So Mohammed would be awarded a merit. In the exams, you've only got 30 minutes or so to answer this question. I'm not sure if you're going to have time to do, let me just open this up, to do this. So this is the plan that you can carry out, okay? You might have time, you might not, but you can ask for some extra exam paper and you can just do a rough plan. So you read the question and you just split up into variables, constants, and arrays. What are the inputs? What are the processes? And what are the outputs? So we'll do that together before we write the response. In the exam, you might not have time. All right. Give me some variables, constants, or arrays that you can identify in this program, okay? Anything, you can write them in the chat, you can say them out loud and I'll write them down. Any variables, constants, and arrays, if we go back to the question. So if I go back to, let me just present the question. Yeah, good. Thank you. So I'll write this down as you guys add them. So nice. Thank you. Student name. It's a clear one. Okay. It's an array. Any more? Student mark, which is a 2D array. This is just a plan, by the way. Subject number. Yep, because we have to ask that, we have to know that's a variable. Class size, yep, we need to know how many students are in the class. It's another variable. What do we have to calculate? We have to calculate two things according to the, we have to calculate two things. What are they? Average mark is 1, good, and total mark, excellent. So they're variables as well, okay? So average mark, a variable, and then total mark is also a variable. All right. Anything else? Combined total mark, yeah. So combined total mark, excellent. Do you know, if you can see on the last, something else we have to work out. Read the third bullet point and then the 1, 2, 3, fourth sub bullet point. Grade awarded yet? So grade awarded, excellent. So grade awarded, okay. And then, you know, there's some counting that we have to carry out. What is that counting? What do we have to count? The number of what? Check the last bullet point. The number, what, you know, the grades, what are the categories of the grades? What could they get if we look at that table? Good, distinction, merit, and pass. And then it says the number of them, right? So let's have a look. So we can call it we can say number of distinctions, number of merits, number of passes, number of fails, okay? So look at that. This is, if I go back to here now, I'm going to just present that little plan that I've created. So all I did first of all is when I read the scenario is, you could do this in the exam if you have time. It will help you when you're doing your response. Just make a list of all the variables, constants, arrays you can identify. I've done that in that first column. Okay. In this question, there are two things that the user will input, which affect how the program works. So if we go back to if I go back to, there are two things that, two inputs. What are the two inputs, do you think? Two numbers which affect how the program will work. You can say, so the class size, okay, and then there's something else. If I say there's 20 students, what do we have to decide? 20 students, how many what? Subject, yeah, subject numbers, good. So how many subjects they're studying? So let's have a look at this. Two inputs is the class size and the subject, number of subjects. Excellent. In terms of processes, okay, so processes like the techniques that we're going to use. What type of loop would I use in this program, and why? If we had to think of it, what type of loop? Right. Thanks. Yeah.
You're very welcome.
All right.
It would have not let me sleep. I have to sort of.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
It's just a habit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
You got dates, by the way.
Sorry?
You got dates.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. All right.
Right, so,
Yeah, Mo. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Go on, Mo.
so you're talking about how would we repeat the loop for the entire code, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah,
What
so
type?
that would be, wouldn't it be a for loop, because we already have the number of students, so we just need to cycle through those one by one.
Excellent. Yeah, it's for loop or account control loop. So we can say for loop because we know the number of students. That will be some input. It's a fixed number. There's no condition, right? If there was a condition, we'd use either while or a repeat loop. Excellent. All right. You know, in this program, we have to work out, based on their average mark, we have to calculate the grade that they've been awarded. What selection statement could we use for this task? What selection? What selection statement could we use? If, yeah, so good. So we can just, in the plan, I'm going to write if statement to calculate grade. We could also use a case statement, really, for this question, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 possible grades. So case would also be appropriate, but probably if is going to be a lot easier to implement. All right. What calculations? We have to carry out 2 calculations. What are those calculations? What do we have to calculate? 2 calculations for each student. So if I go back, so let me just present. So this was the example where we're visualizing it, right? So for each student, what do I need to do? What 2 things do I need to work out?
So the total and the average.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Mo. That's what I was looking for. So calculate the total and average, which is another process, okay? The last thing here now, if we look at it says calculates, stores, it says in this bullet point here, the last bullet point in the requirements, it says calculates, stores, and outputs the number of distinctions, merits, passes, and fails for the whole class. So what would this be? What technique? Is it counting or is it totaling? So we have to say, for example, imagine all of you did an exam. I'd have to calculate, I'd have to say, this many students got a grade 9, this many students got a grade 8, this many students got a grade 7. So what am I doing for each grade? I'm counting, right, the number. Thank you, Mo, counting. So there's going to be some counting of the number of each grade awarded. All right. Lastly, the outputs. What are we displaying here? If you look at any of the bullet points, give me a list of things that I need to display at the end of the program. Name, good one. Give me something else. Total, excellent. Yep, more. Average, yep, keep going, Yusuf. Grade awarded, excellent. And then there's one more thing that we need to output. So name, total, an output. Average mark is an output. Grade awarded is an output. Okay, and then there's one more thing we need to output. Number of distinctions, good. Number of each grade, excellent. Number of each grade awarded. Okay. All right. Thank you. Brilliant, Yusuf. So now let's have a look. In the exam, right, you can just construct this table. It might not work for you. You might not even have the time in the exam to do this. But maybe if you do this like very quickly, 5 minutes, a rough plan like this, like a plan like this, it will help you when you're writing the pseudocode because you won't make any glaring omissions. You won't miss out important features if you plan before you write it. It's kind of like, in English, when you write a long essay response, you're likely to plan the essay before you write the essay. All right, so if you have time in the exam, spend about 5 minutes doing this on some paper that they'll provide, where you make a plan of the scenario to answer each part of the scenario, okay? Now, let's answer this question together, okay? So let me just... Okay, so... All right. So I'm gonna type the question. I'm gonna type the response, and then here. So this bit, the plan here, is it's like the structure of your response. So it's in logical order. We're going to declare, then we're going to initialize, then we're going to do the inputs, then processes, and then outputs. So let's do this step by step together. I'm going to start off with I'm just going to put this as like a title, okay, for each section, just to make it clear on what you need to do. So we're going to start off with declarations, okay? This is like the variables, constants, and arrays. I'm just going to declare them. In the question, it says you do not need to initialize any data in the array. So we don't need any data. We're just going to declare. So just to remind you, I'm going to write my response in pseudocode because I just prefer it, okay? Can you guys see as I'm typing, by the way? Is it clear when I'm typing? Or shall I make the font bigger?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. So let's have a look. So I'm going to declare. I'm going to start to declare. Don't even need to do this. The student name. I think this has already been declared, but that's fine. So I'm going to call it student name, and then it's an array. And then this will be the size of the array. So we could just say, we don't even know the size, so we'll leave it empty. Declare second array. I think in the question it's already been done, but I'm just going to do it anyway. Student mark, which is a 2D array. It's an array. I don't know the size, okay, so I'll just leave it empty. Then we're going to have some arrays, one for the total mark and one for the average mark. So I'm just going to declare those. Declare total mark, and then array, and declare average mark. Which is another array, okay? And then there's going to be two inputs. So there's going to be the, where is it? The class size and the subject number. So they're the two things I'm going to, they're two inputs by the user. So I'll just declare them, okay? So first one is declare class size. And then what data type will that be, class size? What data type would that be?
Integer.
Integer, thank you, Mo. Integer, and then declare subject number, and that will also be an integer, okay? Then we need some count, because the question says calculate, stores, and outputs the number of distinctions, merits, passes, and fails. So we need to declare say distinction. I can call this number, or in fact, I'll just call it distinction number, which is an integer. And I'm going to do the same for the other grades. So Just copy and paste this 4 times. I'm going to change the name of the variable. Okay, so merit pass and fail. Here, what have I done in terms of my arrays and my variables? What have I made sure as I'm writing them? Do these make sense? Are they meaningful, these variable names or these array names? Are they meaningful? Are they clear what they should hold? Yeah, exactly. So you don't want to declare something like X or an acronym like SN, for example, because they're not meaningful. So if you want the top n marks, your variables, constants, and arrays have to have meaningful names. All right. Now I'm going to, if I go back here, do you know the grade for each, the number of marks you need, the average marks you need for each grade is a fixed number. So you need 70 and above for a distinction, 55 and above for a merit, and 40 and above for a pass. So we've done our declaration. I'm going to now do the section called initialization. What initialization means is, I'll show you, is what is the initial value of all of the, not all of them necessarily, because not the arrays, because we don't need to declare them, of the variables and the constants. So let's have a look. Distinction, the arrow means it's assignment or initialization. What am I going to initialize it as? What number? What number? If we look at, shall I go back up? Not 0, Kamel, because it's a constant, it's a fixed number. What does a distinction? It's always going to be what and above. If you look at the table, 70, yes, excellent. So distinction, I'm going to initialize it as 70, okay? Merit, I'm going to initialize it as 55 as per the table. And then pass, I'm going to initialize it as 40, okay? So these are all constants. They're fixed numbers. They don't change while the program is running. They're not like a variable, okay? All right, so this is my initial initialization. We're going to use this later on. All right, now, you know, we have these, the distinction number. We want to count the number of distinctions. Initially, what am I going to initialize it as at the beginning of the program? What is that going to be? What am I going to initialize it as? 0, exactly, yeah. Because before we start counting, there's no there's no merits that have been achieved yet. So I'm just going to initialize all of them as 0. So before we even entered anything, I'm going to initialize it as 0, because that's what they start off as. The number of people that have got a pass, a fail, a distinction, and a merit is 0 until we add to that, okay? All right, so now look at this. Step 1, declaration. Step 2, initialization. Now we need to do step 3, which is input, okay? So now if we just put it in this order, it makes the program has logical sense. It makes logical sense. All right. So now if we go back to our plan, there's 2 things that we need to input: the class size and the number of subjects. So let's have a look. Class size And then I'm gonna just do some input. And then how would I phrase the message inside? What would I say to them? What would that look like? That message inside the input. What does the user need to enter? The number of what? Anyone? What should go in between the quotation marks?
So like a suitable phrase, like enter, class size.
Thank you, Mo. Enter the class size. Excellent. So then that's the input, okay? Second input is going to be number of subjects. So, and we call the variable subject. Same thing. This is going to be another input. I'm going to say enter the number of subjects. All right, good. So look at this. Declare, initialize, and then now we've done the inputs. What's the next stage? We're going to do the process, which is most of the code now. Okay. Let's have a look. So this is a quite a lot now. Okay. All right. So you know there's a 2D array, okay, which means we need to use a nested for loop. But I'm just going to use a single for loop just to simplify the process so that it's clear to everyone as you're writing this code, just to make it a little bit easier. So we could just say for, and then we can just call this, I don't know, student count. It's going to go from 1 to what? Which input, class size or subject number? It's the for loop. It's going to be from 1 to the class size. This is how many times. So what this means is if there are 30 students in the class, then it'll go from 1 to 30. If there are 10 students entered, it'll go from 1 to 10. So I'm just going to leave it as a single loop. With a loop, then we do the indentation. So the first thing we want to do is we want to calculate the total marks, okay? So we can just say, I can just say total mark is equal to we can say what? Where's the mark stored? It's in an array called student mark. That array called, I've called it student mark. So what this line is doing here is it's calculating the total mark of for all of their subjects. So this will store it in some array called total mark in the same index. Do you know in a for loop, what do we need to end the for loop with? Should be something like this, right? Next. And that will be the next iteration until it does it for all of the class. So this bit of code is calculating the total mark. Now, if I wanted to calculate now, I'm going to carry on. I'm going to say the average mark. In fact, let me see what I've called that. The average mark. I'm just going to go in here, just do the same thing, but for the average mark now. Average mark. So the average mark is going to be the total mark divided by the number of subjects. So now this is going to work out the average mark, okay? So what this means, if I go back to just going to present this one. If I go back to this one, so to work out the average mark, we took the total mark, which is 56 plus 77 in this example from Hamid, and then we divided that by 2 or the number of subjects, okay? If there were 3 subjects, we divided by 3. If there are 4 subjects, we divided by 4. But we use this variable called subject number, which would store the number of subjects, and that would give us the average mark. So if Mohammed, for example, did 10 subjects, we would take all the total of all 10 subjects divided by 10, and that would give us the average. All right. Then next thing is we're going to just do some calculations. So we're going to say if, oops, let me make this bigger. If it's an average mark, because if we go back to this, it says if their average mark is greater than or equal to 70, then they get a distinction. So let's have a look at this. So if we go back here, before we do the output, we could just do a variable. So we want to say if average mark, in fact, I'm just going to copy it from here. Average mark is, we can say, is more than and equal to, there's a variable that I've used to store the grade boundaries. What is, or the constant, sorry. What is that constant? What's it called? Can anyone see it? I could just say if it's more than 70. But if we go back up here, you know, you look here, it says greater than or equal to 70 is a distinction. But in my code, I've already stored that in some constant value called distinction. So I can just say, instead of 70, what can I replace 70 with? Distinction, yeah, correct. Thank you, Kamal. So distinction. So if they score more than distinction, which is 70, then we could say we could say, I've just got this. And then we can say we want to increment the number of distinctions, because remember here, if we go back, we have to calculate, store, and output the number of each grade. So we're going to say we're going to increment that. So we're going to say, and I've called the variable, if I come back here, distinction number. So that's the number of distinctions, okay? Equals, and then what do I have to increment it by? 1, because every time someone's average mark meets that distinction criteria, it increments it by 1. And then we can just say something like grade awarded is equal to, and then distinction. And then now I need to do the same thing, but for, we've done it for distinction, we need to do it for merit. So I just change it, oops. So, merit. And then I change the number of merit things. Well, yeah, you okay?
Sir, shouldn't there be a loop at the start?
A loop?
Yeah, for loop.
Ah, for this one?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, let me just add that. Good point. Thank you, Kumail. So if I just, and then the first one's an if, so the next one's going to be else if. And then you're saying, I'm just going to say for, we call this student count as well. 1, 2, pass size. And this should just, I'm just going to indent this a little bit like that. Okay, nice. And I'm going to do the same. Is that all right, Kumail?
Yeah.
All right. So we've done it for distinction. We've done it for merit. Then the next one is going to be the pass. So if average mark is more than or equal to pass, and then if we look at what that variable pass holds, a constant, which is 40. So if it's saying if it's more than 40, then then we increment this counter. And the grade that they're awarded is a pass. Okay. And then we're just going to do the output now. So we've done the process. We just do the output. Okay. So we just do the last bit. So we've done the calculation. We've done selection, which is an if statement. We've done the iteration, which is the for loop. And then let's have a look at this output now. So okay. So now let's do the output. Okay. Okay, so we're going to output. So I'm going to do this within a loop as well. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to use the same loop counter because it can do each student at a time. Okay. And then we're going to say, what command word do I use to display something, to print if I'm writing in pseudocode?
Output.
Yeah, brilliant. Output. And I just do, because look at this, if we go back to the criteria, it says you have to output the name, the combined total mark, the average mark, the grade awarded, okay? So that's what we need to output. So I'm going to output name, and then it's going to be the variable or the array called, call it student name. That's the first output. And then I'm going to do the next output. The next output is going to be, if I look at the bullet point here, combined total mark, and then the array is called total mark. Okay. But instead of name, what would I put here, the message?
Mark.
Say that again, sorry?
Mark.
Yeah, mark. Mark, or I could just say total mark, okay? And the next thing we're going to do is the average mark. So we could just say average mark, and then it's in this array called average mark. And there's one more thing we're missing, the grade awarded. The grade awarded, actually, I've stored it here in just a variable called grade awarded. The problem now, it's going to overwrite the variable every time. So instead of just assigning it, I'm just going to change it in here to output. And then it can just output it there. Okay. Output, distinction, merit, pass. Okay. So there you go. So now we've got the output. We can just do the next. Almost done, guys. And it's a bit tedious. And then one last thing that we're missing, though. at the end of the program, what do we need to output? We've calculated, we've stored it, but we haven't outputted the what? The number of distinctions, merits, passes, and fails. So we made this thing that initially started at 0. Then every time a student achieved that grade, we incremented it. So we can just say, we can just output outside the loop, because we don't want to do it every time. Just do it for all of the students. We can say output the number of distinctions is, and the variable is called distinction number. Okay, and then we do the same for each of the grades. So the number of merits is merit number. The number of passes is the variable called pass number. And then the number of fails is fail number. So look at this. If we go back, right, this is basically the solution. If I go back to, I'm just going to present. If I go back to the mark scheme, okay, let's see from the solution that we wrote together. First bullet point, use a range of programming techniques that is appropriate to the scenario. What programming techniques did I use in this scenario?
Iteration.
Say that again, Kareem.
Iterations.
Good. We used iteration, which is a for loop in this example. That's one technique. What other technique did we use? What other techniques did we use? Did we use an if or a case statement? If statement, good. Yeah, we used an if statement, so that's another programming technique. We declared our data structures, so for like the arrays, the variables, and the constants. So that's another technique. All right, next one, it says data structures are appropriate and store all the data. That means the variables, the constants, and the arrays that we have used. In this example, were they appropriate to the scenario? Yep. All right, brilliant. And then if I just go back, I'm just going to have to present the whole screen. If I go back, the program has been fully commented. Have I put any comments in my program? Can you guys see any comments in my program? No, I haven't. We haven't done any. We're going to come back and do that. So I haven't done any comments. Have I used meaningful identifier names?
Yeah.
Yep. So if you go back up here, we can see when we declared, they're meaningful. Student name, class size, they make sense, they're clear. Okay, good. Is the program in logical order?
Yeah.
Yep, declaration, initialization, then input, then process. You can see I've got the headings, then output. So it's in logical order. I haven't done an output before the process, for example. All right, good. Does the solution meet all the requirements given in the question? So let's go back to the requirements of the question. So have we calculated the combined total marks? Yep. Have we calculated the average mark? Yep. Have I outputted for each student the name, the combined total mark, the average mark, and the grade awarded? Yep. Have I calculated, stored, and outputted the number of distinctions, merits, passes, and fails? So at the end, the number of distinctions, the number of merits, the number of passes, the number of fails. So as you can see, my solution, as I go back, it suffices all of these requirements. So we can say, yep, the solution meets all of the requirements. The only thing that we're missing when we look at the summary of the mark scheme is that the program we haven't fully commented. This is very important. So now I need to go back to my program and I need to write some comments. So in program code, comments is a hashtag. In pseudocode, it's double forward slash, but that doesn't matter. We could just write comment. Okay, so a good comment would be, this is the declaration of all of the data structures. Okay, and then we can say, here I have initialized the values for the constants. I can add another comment here. Here I have initialized the values for the count for each grade. Okay, we're nearly done, guys. Just like 5 more minutes and we're done. Here I can say, this is the input for the class size and subject number. Say a for loop or count control loop for loop used to calculate the total marks. Say a for loop to calculate the average marks. So all my comments are doing is explaining that code, and I get some good marks for that. Okay. Here I am we can say working out the number, or we can say the count for each grade. Okay. And here I can say output the name, total marks, and average mark. And here, one last comment, the output for the number of each grade. So the comments are very important because your logic might not be correct, or the syntax, there might be some issue. If you write a comment, you're essentially explaining to the examiner what you intended, and that will help you, get some marks. Okay, so that's the solution. I'm just a little bit conscious. I've overrun a little bit, guys. The 15-mark question, you're going to see it. Do not let it overwhelm you in the exam. Okay, your aim should be to maximize the number of marks you get in that question. That's all it should be. All right, you shouldn't panic. You shouldn't think, I don't even know what's going on. If you break it down, i.e. you plan it like we did using that table, and then you break everything down into logical orders. So the 4 things you need to remember is declaration, initialization, input, process, and output, and have something based on the scenario for each of those, then you'll be able to get some good marks. So declaration, initialization, input, process, and then finally output. If you do it in that structure and you break it down into that structure, it'll make the big question a lot easier to approach. Okay. Any questions regarding anything to do with paper 2? You guys have any questions? All right, brilliant. I'm sure you guys will do well. I'm sure you'll do well. And just stop recording.